This interplay of geopolitics and economics plays itself out best in the Asia-Pacific region. What are the next 50 years going to look like? Where does India, the United States and China fit in this fascinating emerging picture here in the Asia-Pacific? A brand new book is out, Super Economies, India, America and China and the Future of the World by Raghav Bahl. And we'll be discussing his book. Raghav Bahl is founder-editor of Network 18 and now founder-editor of Quintolin Media. Congratulations on the fascinating new book. It's well-researched. Welcome to the program. Jay Panda, Biju Janata Dal Member of Parliament, welcome to the program. Just back, fresh of a trip from China, so I'm sure you'll have very interesting insights about China. And of course, MJ Akbar, veteran journalist, now spokesperson of the BJP, now watching live from the other side of the fence, and also an avid China as well as US watcher. Welcome to the program, gentlemen. Let me start with you, Raghav. So, super economies as opposed to superpowers of the 20th century. If you could start off by explaining to our viewers how you came up with this term and what is a super economy? How do you define it?
Yeah, well, that's the fundamental thing, that the 20th century was the age of superpowers, and superpowers were largely defined in military terms. There were two blocks which were having hardly any engagement with each other, no people-to-people movement, no trade. They were literally facing off militarily. But the book makes a case that in the 21st century, it's going to be the age of super economies, which is very different from this age of superpowers, for the simple reason that all these super economies are very meshed.
Okay.
They are meshed with people-to-people contact, trade, investment, multilateral negotiations. Who are these super economies? So I have outlined about 5 or 6 check the boxes there. The 3 most important are economic size. And I've defined that as if you're close to about 15 percentage points of global GDP, then you can qualify. Today only America and China, both about 16, 17 percentage points of global GDP. Qualify. India is about 8 percentage points, but growing the fastest. So India has the highest chance of closing this gap and coming closer to that.
But why not economies like Germany or Japan, which even today are huge in size and also in terms of their influence?
Yeah, so first check the box is economic size. The second check the box is land mass. Some of those countries are very small. Third check the box is population size. Again, some of those countries are very small. Fourth check the box is, are they on the upward trajectory of their growth or are they on the downward slope of their growth? Both America and India are going to be about 2 of the faster growing countries, which by 2050 would still be growing. Growing economically, growing in population terms, younger. That's a little known fact that even America would be a growing younger country in 2050. China, of course, wouldn't. But China has gathered all other facets around it. And the last one is ability to project military power. Not to use military power, but to project it so that you can use it in bargaining situations. So, on that count, Japan and Germany sort of fall off.
Jay, you're just fresh off a trip from China. Does the term super economy sort of accurately reflect, in your opinion, what China is today and what India probably aspires to be some years from now?
Well, certainly China is already the world's second largest economy. So it is in that sense at least a mega economy, not a super economy. But what I got out of Raghav's book, and by the way, I think this pushes the envelope in a genre that has had such stellar writing as Toffler and Nisbet about megatrends, is that it's not just about economic size. It's about what else you bring to the table as well. And just like it's not just military strength. Now, just to use an example, the US, for instance, has had immense military presence in the Middle East. And one of the arguments for that has been its own energy security. But what the US has achieved by way of technological breakthrough on fracking and regulatory breakthrough in allowing, through fracking, to become now a larger oil producer than Saudi Arabia is much more important, has much more clout than its military presence for these last so many decades.
But you don't think some of that sheen has gone off because of the oil prices plummeting the way they have?
But that's precisely the point. The point is that because of the extra supply due to fracking, due to the technological and the regulatory breakthroughs that the US actually pioneered, is oil prices have gone down, which is acting as a boost to its own economy. So it's technology as well. It's also something that you can, that Joe Nye has called soft power. In that sense, I would say India has immense strengths which are only just now beginning to get tapped. So China certainly is a mega economy. It has many strengths. I wouldn't call it a complete super economy in the sense that the ideal has been defined by Raghav, but it's certainly one of the big players.
It's getting there. But Akbar, would you say that, and this is the case that Raghav makes in his book, that the story of the first half of the 21st century is going to be defined by how the world manages China's rise and how China itself manages its own rise. He makes a case that India and America should come together along with this arc of democracies around the Asia-Pacific to try and ensure that the stakes are high enough for China not to alter the rules of the game too much. Do you subscribe to that?
Let's begin from another starting point, in my view, just to give context to this text. One of the things I didn't see in Raghav's book, I wish, because it would have been very apposite. India and China actually are in what I call the 1750 period of their economies. In 1750, and this you'll find in Paul Kennedy's book, The Rise and Fall of Great Powers of Great Nations. In 1750, India had 24% of world manufacturing output. China had 30% of world manufacturing output. Between us, we had 50% of world manufacturing output. Now, both India and China did export. But their major strength lay in the fact that the greater part of the markets were internal. Their populations enabled a super economy to be built internally. It did not require external. Many theories are expounded over why India and China are two nations which had never conquered. Right? They have not really made conquest into China had only one phase, Admiral Hay and so on. India never. Now, one of the reasons is because most people who go out to conquer in search of an economy, a colonial economy, aggressive economy, an acquisitive economy. All empires do that. Right? Geography has to mean something economic for it to work. India and China have never needed to do that. And that is one very strong reason why that. But the question that you raise, and which he raises in the book, and that becomes relevant, because of the internal nature of their strength, the internal dynamic of their problems also can become the biggest obstacle to their future.
Both for China as well as for India?
As India.
Okay.
I believe India has the advantage for one very significant reason, because India has essentially a modern template of governance, whereas China does not have a modern template of governance. Now, what is modernity? Modernity I define in four simple, basic, non-negotiables. One, you must be democracy. You must have a democracy in order to be modern. Number two, you must have faith equality in order to be modern. Faith equality means including your right to be an atheist, by the way. Right? Number three, you must have gender equality. Number four, you must have poverty elimination as one of your objectives. China does very well on gender equality and poverty elimination. But China's problem is going to be democracy and faith equality. And in this conflict between Hong Kong and Beijing, I tell you, it is not Beijing who would necessarily win. Hong Kong might win.
I want to bring both your thoughts into this, as somebody who's just come back from China. Do you get the feeling that as China grows over the next 20, 30, 40 years, democracy or some form of democracy is an inevitability? Or do you feel that the Chinese, and again, I want to draw your thoughts in on this, both of you, young people in China are just happy with their apartments, their cars, a decent job, aspirational living? I mean, political freedoms or democracy is not something that's top of their list.
This is going to be the imponderable for China. How it makes a transition to democracy. My bet, I won't be around to see it perhaps, is that it will become a democracy.
It will.
It has to. There is no other way. But when that has to happen, how is the transition handled? Because an economy which has, or a country which has pressure cookered its freedoms, when suddenly those freedoms come, or even if they come over a period of time, how are they accommodated?
You reckon it will be messy?
Does it? It has to be messy, but are they able to accommodate? Do they become a multi-party state? Or do they become a country which is very at the top controlled, but allows a large amount of internet freedoms and large amount of personal freedoms, which is what China seems to be experimenting with. They are saying political freedoms will come to later, but as far as personal freedoms are concerned, you start enjoying those in bigger and bigger measure. Now, it can't stop. there is a line that you can't draw. So I think that's the biggest challenge. And I fully agree with Akbar that India's big strength is, and that I've said in the book, is institutionally, which Akbar calls modern, and I agree with him. Institutionally, we are far superior to China. In fact, we've put the cart and the horse at the right time. We first created institutional strength, and now are trying to go about create economic strength.
Just to draw your thoughts in terms of young people in China. I mean, the time that I lived there, whenever I spoke to a young person, democracy or political freedoms were never really top of the line for them. For them, it was about housing prices, it was about salaries as they enter the job market. It was about basic livelihood issues. And most of them seem to be fine with what the Communist Party of China was offering them right now. It could change in the years ahead, but I'm talking about right now.
So the compact that the Chinese leadership has had with its citizenry for the past 3.5 decades is that we give you prosperity, don't question anything else, and it has worked so far. The fallacy would be to think that what has worked so far is going to work in the future. Now, in 3 days, my third visit to China, continue to be extremely impressed with the hardware that they've achieved, the infrastructure, the buildings, the highways, etc. But 3 days without Twitter, Facebook, Google, Gmail was very stifling. That was about the most I could take. Now think about something else. As opposed to just a few years ago, China has now become the largest contingent of tourists visiting the world. 180 million Chinese are going out of China every year to
and the largest spenders, by the way, too.
But the more important thing is, if you have 180 million Chinese going out and experiencing some other reality, other paradigm, it is bound to have an impact back home. And while I will say that it is inevitable that for China to sustain, it has to become a democracy, will it necessarily? Look at the last couple of examples. When the same issue came up 25 years ago for the Soviet Union, it got some forms of democracy, but also split up in the process. On the other hand, you've had 35 years, 40 years ago, as South Korea transition from a non-democratic but successful market economy to a democratic, successful market economy.
There is a flip side to that argument, and that's what young Chinese say, that, look, we don't need Twitter and Facebook. We have our own Facebook and Twitter. So for a foreigner going into China, it is stifling, and I agree. I mean, having lived there 3 years, it was stifling not to be able to access these social media sites. But for the average Chinese, I guess it's a different story. I'm going to take a break. When we come back, we'll talk to Akbar about the new emerging theater of potential conflict, which is the East and South China Seas. As China rises, and it certainly seems to be making assertive claims to a lot of areas around these two seas, how does India, and with the help of countries like the United States, as well as other countries in this region, how do we manage this relationship? Quick break. We're back with this fascinating conversation in a couple of minutes.